Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and we are in the dead season of the NHL offseason, awaiting a couple more moves from Kyle Dubas. But in the meantime, we still have plenty to talk about today. We're going to take a look at where the latest draft picks stand in the Pittsburgh Penguins prospect system, especially considering over the last calendar year, Kyle Dubas has propped up that top 10 list at the very least a heck of a lot. So we'll go through my top 10 prospects in the Penguins system. Then we're going to break down the best case scenario for Penguins third line center, Kevin Hayes. And it's going to be interesting because we didn't really get to talk about him when that acquisition happened, because it was the Saturday of the NHL draft. And then we had Monday's opening of free agency. And then we had our Tuesday episode. So there was a lot going on. We're going to go back and retroactively talk a little bit more about the acquisition of Kevin Hayes. And then we'll get the final results on this week's Pens poll. Let's get started. And let's start things off with the 2024 NHL draft, because the Pittsburgh Penguins seemingly once again have added a couple of stellar names to their prospect system, something that fortunately we've been able to say a handful of times since Kyle Dubas came to the organization. Now, it is a little bit easier whenever you have the mentality of, again, whatever they're calling it in-house, I'm calling it a rebuild. It's not, your grandmother's rebuild. It's not your father's rebuild. It is a different looking rebuild. But whenever you have that kind of mentality, it's easier to bring in talented names to the prospect system. And I think Kyle Dubas has done that. So before we get into that, Horwat, what have you thought about Kyle Dubas's ability to acquire top prospects here since he joined on June 1st of 2023?
It was part of his plan from the beginning. I think we knew that. He gave the generic, you need to retool on the fly almost. You need to win now and win later. That's sort of the pathway that every GM gives. Mm-hmm. And I think I remember discussing that with you whenever he was hired as, it's the generic answer that every general manager, every head coach, every president, whatever, is going to name. Something felt different about it being Kyle Dubas compared to Ron Hextall. Mm-hmm. So it still doesn't feel like the win now part of it has really happened. I think everyone has their own opinions on the NHL moves that Kyle Dubas has made. Some of them good, some of them bad. But I don't think anyone can, for the most part, disagree that he has definitely at least built for the future. He has at least improved the system. It's still not great. It's still not over the top outstanding. But there are pieces that the organization likes. There are pieces that we like. And then there are definite names that can be NHLers, pretty soon to down the line, because Kyle Dubas has done a good job of retaining first-round picks, except for this last one. We don't worry about it. But then getting good value out of the deep picks. So there's plenty to look forward to in the future. Again, it may not be a overly successful team, but if Sidney Crosby can usher in almost that next generation, there could be a really good team here in Pittsburgh still. And Kyle Dubas is doing a great job of building that young core of guys that are going to be here for a while.
Yeah, you talk about the value in those later picks, and that is the two 18-year-old second rounders that headlined the 2024 NHL draft for the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's right-handed defenseman Harrison Brunick and left winger Tanner Howland. Both of those two are going to be headed back to the WHL this season, even though Tanner Howe, as we talked about last week, signed his ELC when he was here for prospect development camp. But the question then becomes, where do they rank in the Penguin system as of right now? This is the first time that we're putting them in the system. So where is their base level coming in after being drafted at the Sphere in Vegas a couple of weeks ago? I'll run down my top 10 prospects. And again, this is my opinion based on what I've seen, read, and everything in between for all of these prospects. Let me know in the comment section what you think. And also, Horwat, we're going to go back and forth. We're going to start with where Brunick and Howe are, but also I want to get your opinion on just the top 10 in general. So let's get started here with this one. I mean, Braden Yeager is number one. I think that is undoubtedly the fact. And I think anybody that's doing a top 10 prospects is doing a disservice to this list if they don't put Braden Yeager at number one. So I have Braden Yeager at number one. I got Ville Koivunen at number two, Joel Blomqvist at number three. Then I have Vasily Ponomarev at number four. Then I have Owen Pickering sitting at number 5. Sergei Murashov has moved up this list because of how impressive he was last season and how impressive he was in his first glimpses at prospect development camp. So I have Murashov at 6. Then I have Harrison Brunick, 2024 second rounder, at 7. Sam Poulin at 8. Tristan Brose at 9. And then Tanner Howe rounds it out, kicking things off at number 10. So that is my top 10 prospects. First and foremost, Horwat, I have Brunick at 7, Howe at 10. What do you think about the placement of the two newest additions to the Penguins prospect pool?
Let me hit unmute and let you know. I think it's a good spot for the two of them because, like we mentioned, the pool isn't deep in Pittsburgh necessarily. Mm-hmm. So anytime a name comes in, they're automatically kind of shoved into, well, are they a top 10? And for these two, I mean, we discussed it a little bit last episode whenever we were talking about how signing a ZLC. That sort of shows you that the organization seems to believe he is somewhere among those names. I mean, it's an apples to oranges comparison, but Braden Yeager doesn't have his ELC yet. And he was drafted first round last year. Now, she's likely going to get one this summer because he may play NHL games. So he may see some contract handed to him soon, but since Howe got his already, that gives him an edge to some of the other names that you didn't mention. And as for Brunick, I think that's also a good choice. I mean, when it comes to defense in the Penguins system and in the depth or in the prospect system, there isn't much. There's not much at all. It is Owen Pickering, maybe the French Canadian whose name escaped me. He signed a deal last year or 2 years ago. But
Beliveau?
Yes, Isaac Beliveau, and then him. That's about it. They needed to build the defensive portion of their prospect pool, and Brunick's a good choice to do that. And without seeing much of him, at least so far, I would say that's a good placement for him. Not necessarily in the top 5, but right on that edge.
Well, here's the thing about the top 5 that intrigues me is 2 of them, or honestly 3 of them, could be graduated this year, right? You talk about Koivunen and Ponomarev, both guys who have a chance to start the season at the National Hockey League. And then a guy like Joel Blomqvist, who there's going to be a lot of speculation about whenever he gets his opportunity this year. 3 of these names, and honestly, if you go down through the bottom 5, you can throw in Sam Poulin as well. 4 of the 10 could make an impact at some point this season for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I think that's a massive part of Dubas's plan as well, which is, yes, he has propped up the prospect rankings as of right now to where the top 10 finally looks like a half-decent top 10. But also, this is where a lot of these young guys are going to start getting the overall age gap, which is what we saw and talked about last Thursday. The overall age average, not gap, the age average is going to go down because all of these guys have an opportunity to potentially stick at the NHL this season. They're going to get chances this year with Mike Sullivan's team, especially because Kyle Dubas is going to rely on these guys a lot this year to potentially try to get up to the NHL, have more than a cup of coffee, and really state their claim as full-time NHLers. Similar to what Puustinen did last year, which is why he graduated from this list.
Yeah, and I was going to say how long until Poulin is graduated from this list, because even if he doesn't make it to NHL regularity, this has to be it. I think we said this last 2 seasons. This has to be it of listing him on prospect lists. I think he barely made it to that prospect challenge, those prospect challenges in Buffalo last year because he just didn't play. They just wanted him to play. If he hadn't, stepped away, maybe he wouldn't have even been there. So I think Poulin being on the list is fine. I still am with you on it. He should be for now, but
he's played 6 NHL games at this point. But at this point, it's going to switch this year from, hey, you're a prospect to, hey, you're just an AHLer now.
Yeah, that's about that time. And another thing too is looking at this list is I marked them down. 5 of these players are Dubas additions. You want to talk about him building the future? I mean, yeah, okay, it's through draft, and none of them have really shown spice in the NHL, but that doesn't matter. They're guys that he's brought in and have automatically gave this prospect pool some juice. So there's a lot to be had about Dubas building this team out, and a lot to be had about guys graduating their way off. Like you said, Koivunen could get there, Ponomar could get there, Poulin could get there, and if Joel Blomqvist gets in, we'll see how the goaltending situation shapes up. He could get in there too. There's plenty of room for a big prospect graduating class between 24 and 25 for the Penguins.
Yeah, and that's exactly what they need. You look at the NHL side of things, and that is what they need. They need that infusion of youth that they had back in 2016-17. I don't think the foundation is quite there. I think we can all agree on that. The foundation that's already at the NHL level is not quite there like it was back in those days, but the infusion of youth will still have a massive impact, similar to how it did back, 8 years ago at this point. But you mentioned 5 of the top 10 from Kyle Dubas, 3 of the top 4 from Kyle Dubas, and 2 of those coming from the Jake Gensel trade. Let's move over and talk about somebody at the NHL level, and that is Kevin Hayes. I mentioned that we really haven't had the opportunity to talk about Kevin Hayes, the veteran forward coming in at 32 years old, over from the St. Louis Blues. They attached a second rounder to get rid of his services, and if you're the Pittsburgh Penguins, that's what everybody said is, well, at least you didn't give anything up, and well, at least you got a second round pick, and that helps for the future. But what does it do for the now? And that's what I want to discuss here with you, Horwat, because you get them for nothing. So the stakes are already pretty low, especially because I believe he's in a contract year as well. That I don't have right in front of me, but I do believe that he's in a contract year. Sounds likely that he gets a opportunity to start at third line center. What do you see as the ceiling for a guy like Kevin Hayes entering next season?
Well, he's got 2 years left. He's got this upcoming season and the year after. So the ceiling, I would say, can be decent. He's proven before to be a 40-point scorer. He's capped out at 55, and the year he got traded from the Rangers to the Jets. It's not going to be anywhere near that. I'd say his ceiling is, and what expectations he has is he had 29 points last season. More than that, get 30 plus, even in the position as third line center. I'm not worried about goal or assist split. Just sort of prove you can produce as the third line center, be a decent enough face for that, for the depth, because the Penguins' depth has needed help for ages now. And then play the defensive side of the puck, which should just be steady as normal for him. It's hard to really nail down and sort of say what's good or bad about playing defensive forward stuff without looking at analytics. But whenever he plays, it should be obvious what he can bring. I just say it in this answer for July 16th. For now, it is just the expectations are to play decent enough defensively and exceed 30 points this year to really show that this wasn't a total waste of a move, because yes, for future considerations, but 2 years left at 3 point something. It's already retained, but could that, people will discuss, could that 3 point whatever have been spent somewhere else?
Yeah, and could they have potentially gotten a better option at third line center? Probably. Could they have gotten a better option where they also got a second round pick? No. And I think that's the one thing that you look at and is overwhelmingly positive from that move. But it is exactly what it looks to be. It is the move of a rebuilding team that needs to fill out a roster that has some capabilities, but also needs to not cost you all that much. And it didn't cost them anything in acquisition because they got it for future consideration. So essentially nothing. And then you get a second round pick, which is a massive piece to this. But if you're looking at, Kevin Hayes specifically, last year he had 13 goals, 29 points in 79 games for the St. Louis Blues, and it just didn't work. It didn't fit. It was, Riley Smith to the Penguins-esque, where it didn't fit, except, Kevin Hayes was a little less upset about being in St. Louis, I would imagine, because this has been very storied about, Riley Smith's thoughts and feelings about his trade to the Pittsburgh Penguins. But a repeat of that season, which was a disappointing season, no doubt, would still be only 2 points shy of what Lars Eller brought you offensively last season. And that's what I think the benchmark should be. That is the starting point for a guy like Kevin Hayes, which I think is 100%, if not just achievable, it's probable that he's going to get up to that mark, not only because he is more of an offensively inclined player in the bottom six, but because I do think that he will bounce back and have a better season than he did in St. Louis. I'm not saying he's going to bounce back and score career high. But I think when you're looking at the ceiling, it's 15 to 20 goals, which is where he's finished the last 5 years around, and 45 to 50 points. And that is, if you're getting that, which is a 20-point increase on Lars Eller on a year where the Penguins finished 3 points out of the playoffs, you're going to be happy with that result.
Yeah, it's even 45 to 50 seems maybe not overkill, but quite high expectations. I know he's not far removed from a 54-point season, but it's just the way that was on a weirdly bad Philly team that he may not have had the greatest, palling around friendship with his teammates. But we'll see where things go. I think he's going to be an okay addition to the Penguins. Like I said, if he can base it at 30 points and go from there, you're right. If he hits 30, you said that's 2 less than what Lars Eller brought this past season.
29 was 2 less. Lars Eller had 31 points.
Yeah, 31. All right. So, yeah, if he can exceed what Lars Eller brought, that's the bare minimum. And that should be a pretty easy hurdle to clear. The max, it's just tough to guess the max on players, especially when they're coming to a new team. You don't know how they're going to mesh with new line mates, who their line mates are going to be, and if they're going to stay consistent all season, especially the way the Penguins are filtering in and out of wingers in certain spots. Kevin Hayes will come in and have new names to get to learn to play with, and that'll be a mystery to see what his max could be. I'd say for now, the max, though, isn't going to be too much higher than 40, if 40. I don't have super great expectations, but a little more than what Eller brought, and not touching a career high in points.
I think the other part of this that has to be talked about is I think he's going to have more offensively capable line mates than Lars Eller had on the third line last year. I mean, you look at, you're going to get a seasoned Drew O'Connor, who going into last year, there were some expectations, but going into this year, there are people right now that are saying, hey, they're fine if he's their first line winger, right? And if they are able to go out and get a winger, which still feels like that's outside of Crosby, that is objective number one for Kyle Dubas, is to get somebody to play with Crosby. Then you get Drew O'Connor, who's a New Jersey guy that went to school in New Hampshire, that's playing alongside a guy from the Beanpot, right? In Kevin Hayes, that could mesh really well. You get Valtteri Puustinen in year 2 potentially on his wing, and a guy that had so much more offensive firepower than he showed last year when scoring 5 goals in 52 games, especially for a guy like Hayes, who's a setup guy really at his core. Getting the opportunity to play with a sniper like Puustinen, who is starting to get his feet underneath him at the NHL level. And if not, you got some high quality prospects. Koivunen has played against professionals over in Europe. What does he look like? Does Ponomarev, who I believe is a point per game player in his NHL career or something like that, he has like 1 point in 2 games or 2 points in 1 game, whatever it is, but a high talent player. Or maybe if it's a guy like Jesse Puljujärvi, who I think a lot of us need to start talking about a little bit more when looking at next year's team. But either way, you look at all those options, it's a much better crop of options than Lars Eller had last year going into the season. The one thing that we could say about Lars Eller last season is, from day one of training camp, you were there, Eller and O'Connor looked good together. And that was O'Connor before he went on this breakout season. And now, as you saw towards the end of the year, knows how to finish his opportunities more. He always had that forechecking ability. He always had that kind of overall game, that physicality that he likes to bring, but it was the finishing ability that escaped him throughout much of the season. He found that at the end of the year, and he carries that into this year. And I think that's going to be a big help if he's playing on a line with Kevin Hayes. Now, obviously, it's a huge help if he's playing with Crosby, but I think it helps if he's playing with Hayes as well.
Yeah, he's essentially learned how to use his abilities. I think that's one way you could describe Drew O'Connor, is that he is learning what he has. He's learning about his speed. He's learning about his skill, and he's fully fleshing out his game. And that can bode well for playing with Crosby, or he can really learn in that third line role as well. So for Drew O'Connor, anywhere he sits should be a good spot for him. And for Kevin Hayes, he should have better options than what Lars Eller had. He also, to figure down the stretch of the season, whenever the Penguins were really going for it, Lars Eller was sat with Riley Smith and Valtteri Puustinen, who Puustinen's still going to be there, so it's not like it's that much of a fresh fresh start. I forget who Kevin Hayes played with in St. Louis. I think that's where I would like to see that sort of comparison. Is he going to be playing with better wingers than he was with the Blues or even with the Flyers? Because he had, like I said, 54 points 2 seasons ago on a very bad Flyers team.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what the relationship situation was there, but there's a reason why they got him out and retained salary. So
yeah, for what at that point 3 years they retained $3.5 million on Kevin Hayes. But I do believe, and again, don't quote me on this, I'd have to go back and double check. I do believe he played a large part of last season with Kasperi Kapanen in St. Louis.
Of course he did.
Of course he did. But before we try to go down that foxhole, I do like the thought of a Drew O'Connor, Kevin Hayes, a Puljujarvi line. I'd like to see them get a run at some point this season.
Yeah, that could be fun. That's on paper, without knowing that Drew O'Connor is learning his game, that just sounds like a line where offense kind of goes to die.
It kind of does, but at the same time, Puljujarvi and Hayes are both good at creating in the offensive zone. It's just somebody has to finish. That's the question, and that's always the question with Mike Sullivan teams is who's finishing their opportunities here, and that's why I think Puustinen likely starts there. But I do like the thought of O'Connor, Hayes, Puljujarvi. That's a lot of body mass, right? That's a heavy line right there. So, and I think that they all have some pretty good offensive instincts as well. So I think it's a line that could create, and it's a line that I think Penguins fans who seemingly like to look at the height and weight, they'll like that line.
They will. That is the video game size line. Like those dudes are big guys. I mean, whenever I say that's where offense goes to die, I mean, all three of those players have offensive capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of, like you said, who's finishing here. It's a lot of setup.
Drew O'Connor gets a 30-goal season because the other two refuse to shoot the puck.
Exactly.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Essentially, from the third line, you know what? We take it, but
anybody would take 30 goals from a third liner. Come on.
Exactly. So I don't hate the line. I just really feel like, all right, there's clearly a mission here, and that is kill time. Kill time, keep the puck out of your own net. Barely
score
put
a goal
the puck,
every once in a while.
Barely put the puck in the other net. Kill time. We're here to kill times. Crosby and Malkin arrested. Kill time.
I mean, that's essentially been the plan for the Penguins' bottom six since 2005 is like, just don't lose us the game when you're out there. Please, just don't lose us the game, and the other guys will win us the game. And I think Kyle Dubas did say something to that effect, not that harsh, but like saying that Kevin Hayes is starting at third line center. He's going to get those defensive zone starts, and it's going to be able to move the puck up the ice, which opens things up and makes life easier for Crosby and Malkin. Essentially saying, get the puck out of the defensive zone. That is your primary objective, Kevin. Just do that. And also, when you're looking at locker room 1-for-1s, if you compare third liners, Riley Smith out, who, I don't know him as a person, but clearly he wasn't happy here. Josh Yohe echoed that sentiment in his mailbag this week. Did not ever really enjoy the fact that he was in Pittsburgh. And bringing in a guy like Kevin Hayes, who outside of whatever happened in Philly, has been known to be a pretty good locker room guy. So especially, I think Crosby and Hayes, something tells me that's going to be like a buddy cop movie, even though we're not going to get to see it because, there's no in the rooms anymore. But I think that it's a good 1-for-1.
It should be a step in the right direction. I don't know, for how much Riley Smith didn't like Pittsburgh or like being in Pittsburgh, he's still skating with Crosby and Brian Dumoulin.
And Brian Dumoulin, who is at this point in Anaheim.
An Anaheim Duck.
Yeah, it's interesting. Draw the conclusions from that, from what you will. But, it was also interesting because I saw that. I was like, man, they really got him Rangers gear really fast.
And I think Dumo was already in Ducks gear too, if I remember the photo correctly.
Well, I mean, hey, this is the top of the top in North American hockey, so I guess they should be able to expedite FedEx shipping. But let's close things out with our Pens poll. I'm not going to call it a weekly Pens poll because I'm horrible about putting these out weekly, but we did put out a poll this week, and we asked which depth forward has the highest upside in the 2024-25 season. You voted. We'll discuss. Blake Lizotte came in with an overwhelming majority of the votes, 49% of the vote going to Blake Lizotte, the newest Pittsburgh Penguin. Jesse Puljujarvi got 30% of the vote, which means that, similar to me, a lot of people out there are saying, hey, let's not forget about Puljujarvi. Sam Poulin gets 17% of the vote, and I don't know why I put Emil Bemstrom in this one. It was kind of rude of me. He gets 4%. I tallied the total. That is 15 total votes for Emil Bemstrom. So he has a nice little fan club out there. But outside of Bemstrom, because I know that's not going to be your answer unless you want to shock the world here, which forward do you think has the highest upside of the four, probably three?
Highest upside is going to be Blake Lizotte. If you want me to chat on Bemstrom for a second, I think he has the most question marks because there could be something, maybe. I don't know. I doubt it. There. But Blake Lizotte's going to be the obvious answer, hence why it was an overwhelming majority here. Just because, he's got a ton of upside joining the team. He's going to be in the lineup. That's one thing you can almost guarantee that the other three on this list straight up cannot, that they will be, if they will be in the lineup. So he's going to have the highest upside by sheer playing the closest to 82 games out of the four of them. Coming into a new system, he already has his goal pretty much set, and that is be that depth forward that's going to play the entire 200 feet, play to the defensive mindset that the Penguins bottom six usually has, but then chip in a goal, chip in a few points as much as possible every now and again. And I just think it's going to be that fresh face feeling. It is guys coming with bigger expectations. We haven't seen it before. Let's see what he can bring, rather than we know Puljujarvi barely gets ice time. We know Sam Poulin might not even make the lineup yet. And we know Emil Bemstrom is going to be Emil Bemstrom. So that's sort of how I saw this playing out.
Yeah, when I look at upside, it is between the top two, right? It is between Lizotte and Puljujarvi because Sam Poulin's played 6 NHL games. You really don't know where he fits here because we talked a lot this offseason already. I mean, especially since July 1st, the center ice position is a tough one to crack in Pittsburgh. They brought in Kevin Hayes, who we just talked about. They have Noel Acciari, who Kyle Dubas is in love with. They have Lars Eller as well. They brought in, Ponomarev, who is a center. So the center ice position for Poulin is not going to be easy to get into. But then you look at the bottom six, and when it comes to wingers, it's crowded. We mentioned these four. There's Puustinen, there's O'Connor, there's Koivunen who comes into that as well. And then there's the floating shadow of Braden Yeager that is looming and potentially ready to come into the light. So there's a lot in front of Sam Poulin. Now, he was one of the more impressive players when he was healthy last year in Wilkes-Barre. So I think there's an opportunity, but he just needs to prove that he's not that, to borrow a baseball reference here, he needs to prove that he's not a quad A player, that he's not a guy that's great in the minor leagues, but can't just translate it to the majors and then the professional leagues and the NHL. So I think there's still, as you mentioned, questions with Bemstrom, but questions with Sam Poulin as well. Between Puljujarvi and Lizotte, I'll go Puljujarvi in this one because I do think the ceiling is a little bit higher. Lizotte is younger. I think Lizotte hasn't really gotten to his ceiling. I think Puljujarvi may have, but his ceiling was 15 goals. And that's a guy who I think the Penguins might be comfortable putting on their third line. I don't know what led to his healthy scratches at certain points last year. It was a little confusing because I thought that when he was out there, he was playing pretty well. It wasn't perfect hockey, but this was the Pittsburgh Penguins of last year. A lot of the times they weren't playing perfect hockey. In fact, most of the time they weren't playing perfect hockey. So I liked what I saw from Puljujarvi, and I think that he has a capability of playing higher in the lineup. We saw last year, he played a couple of shifts, played a couple of games in the top six as well. And I think that still holds true, especially the further away he gets from that double hip surgery that he had a couple off seasons ago, or last off season, I guess it would be. So I'm going to say Puljujarvi, but not because I don't like Blake Lizotte. I just think Puljujarvi has a chance to move up in the lineup a little bit faster than Lizotte, which I think automatically raises his ceiling.
Yeah, and Puljujarvi's had a fascinating season. I mean, jumping from the rehab to the AHL rehab stint, then into the lineup, then out of the lineup, and then in top six, out, in, and productive every time he's been in to cap off. How many games did he even play? Like 10?
He probably played over 20 games, but
it doesn't. And that's the thing; it doesn't feel like it because of how long he was here. Sitting in the press box.
22 games last year, so about a quarter of a season.
Wow. And it doesn't feel like it at all. I think mostly because you remember, that's why I said 10. He has 4 points. I remember all 4 of those points sticking out pretty nicely.
Yeah.
But only 22 games that's surprisingly high for what it felt like.
Yeah.
So maybe he exceeds that this year. I would assume he does now that, like you said, the hip surgery is more in the past. Maybe he comes in with a bit more oomph into preseason and training camp. I have higher expectations for him too, so I'd like to see where it can go. Either way, the fact that at any given moment, 2 of the names that were on this poll here should be in the lineup at once, maybe 3, maybe all 4 if things go a certain way. Yikes.
Yeah.
But 2 to 3 of them being in the lineup at any given night, that's good, I'd say. I mean, we know Blake Lizotte has the overwhelming majority of the votes here for good reason. Puljujarvi finishing in second, and for all the reasons you gave, why that should also be good. Those are at least 2 solid pieces to have in the lineup. We'll see if Bemstrom can bring anything at all, if he even makes it in. And then if Sam Poulin cracks the roster, he's there for a reason then.
Yeah.
We know there's a reason why he's there. So, if anything, I'd say 3 of the 4 names are solid pieces to the lineup. We'll see if the 4th can contribute at all. And we'll see if it can be a 4-piece there that even make the lineup. But overall, those top 2 we're discussing, having those 2 in the lineup at once, as long as they're playing, that's a good addition. That's a good, solid ground to build the bottom 6 on, even though you're building it other ways. But you get what I'm saying. Good to have them in. Good pieces.
Even if all 4 of these guys are in the lineup, and then I understand that the hope is that, it wouldn't be a pretty picture, but it's better than having Matthew Phillips in the lineup.
Remember those 3 games?
It's better than having Jansen Harkins in the lineup. And I'm not going to talk crap on Jeff Carter because he scored more than 10 goals last year, and he's retired. He played and did his job.
Yep.
That's all you can say about Jeff Carter. But it's better than Phillips. It's better than Harkins, certainly, who is signed, by the way. So the long national nightmare is over. You don't have to worry about Sully's pet coming back to Pittsburgh. But
he's a Dumoulin's teammate now. Speak of the Ducks.
Oh my Lord! I mean that mullet in Anaheim, it'll fit right in there with the Zegerases of the world and the Mason McTavishes of the world. So, best of luck to him out there in Southern California. He's certainly going to have better weather than us here in the northeastern part of the country. But at the end of the day, I'm excited to see Puljujarvi in training camp. And I think that's a big thing because last year he jumped on a moving train. He can actually build up with the rest of the team this year. And I think that is also a pretty important factor to put in here as well. So it should be fun. Obviously, we are, I think, still 2 months. They haven't released the dates yet for training camp, but it's typically around the middle, this time in September. So we'll have to wait a couple of months. I'm sure people at the beginning of September will start to come back to Pittsburgh. You'll start to see players back on the ice a little bit more frequently than just Sidney Crosby doing his crazy stuff of being out there all the freaking time. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. And remember, you can find us here on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.